Hello, my name is Nicole Baptiste, and I wanted to spend a little time talking about the spiritual resource. So we'll spend some time today discussing how do we build the spiritual resource. And this resource comes from the Bridges out of Poverty framework. And so again, today we'll talk a little bit about building the spiritual resource and how it can be a pathway to hope and how it can also be a pathway to designing one's future story, whether that's at the individual level, the organizational level, or at the community level. And so let's jump right in. As we all understand, when it comes to defining poverty through the Bridges lens, we define poverty as the extent to which one does without resources. Many times when we think of poverty or when we think of instability, we may define it as a lack of financial resources, but according to the Bridges lens, there are 11 resources that are key indicators of stability. And so I do want you to think about that when we think about overall quality of life, when we think about what defines stability or instability, there are 11 resources. And I really want you to begin thinking about what are other resources beyond money, beyond financial resources? What other resources can lend to an overall quality of life? And so just to share them really quickly, there are 11 resources. And again, these can be considered key indicators of stability. That's how I like to look at them. And these resources can help build an overall quality of life, but it also can be a pathway, a bridge to helping folks, individuals, bridge out of poverty or instability. So as you can see here, we have the financial resource, which is one of our resources, but it's not the only one, which is the ability to purchase goods and services. There are other resources such as in the emotional resource. This is where one is able to choose and control their emotional responses, particularly in negative situations. We also have the mental resource, which is more of a cognitive resource. This is one's ability to read, write, compute. This is one's ability. How do you learn? What are your skills? What are your competencies? There's also health. Health can impact one's ability to experience stability or to bridge out of poverty. So when we think about all of these resources, they are all interconnected. One resource can impact another. And so when it comes to the Bridges framework, we're always encouraging individuals, whether it's through getting ahead or communities, organizations, to build resources that can help bridge individuals out of poverty, but resources that can build stability. And one resource that I want to spend a little time on today is the spiritual resource. Sometimes this resource it's not often overlooked, but I feel like it's a great resource that we can dive into today and just discuss it a little bit more in depth. And so, as I mentioned earlier, all of the resources are interconnected. These 11 resources oftentimes are key indicators that can lead to stability. So let's take a look at the spiritual resource. What is the spiritual resource? When it comes to the Bridges Out of Poverty framework, the spiritual resource is really believing in something larger than yourself, something beyond yourself. And so it's the capacity for hope, it's the capacity for purpose, and it's also the capacity for meaning in life. Oftentimes, a spiritual resource is tied to something bigger than ourselves, as I mentioned earlier. And it really is an internal drive that can empower individuals to envision and pursue a better future. So this is a really critical resource, especially when we think about a day in the life of someone experiencing poverty or instability. It's sometimes riddled with challenges and crisis after crisis after crisis. And oftentimes it's the spiritual resource that can help us tap into an internal power, an internal drive to help us begin to envision a future story. One thing I'll share when it comes to the spiritual resource, it's oftentimes can be tied to our faith, but I do want to say that it's not religion necessarily thinking of religion, but it's really thinking about um, what is a drive that really helps us to see beyond our today. And so for most folks, that would be religion. For many folks, it would be faith. But I just want you to really begin thinking about you as we all think through this time together today, how the spiritual resource is really critical when it comes to helping folks to begin to see a future story, envision a future story. It really helps to build purpose and to build hope. The spiritual resource is critical in helping individuals overcome the survival mindset. We'll talk a little bit about that when we discuss tyranny of the moment and mental models. But when overcoming the survival mindset, one is able to develop the ability to dream, to plan, and to take action towards long-term goals. And so this resource is really important when we think about bridging out of poverty or building a life of stability. And so I just wanted to mention, why is this resource one of our critical resources? So a little bit more about why the spiritual resource matters. So let's talk a little bit about hope. What is hope? Hope is the belief that a better future is possible and is also within reach, even in the face of hardships, difficulties, challenges. It's this belief that this better future exists and I can reach it. It can be tangible for me. Hope also acts as an internal motivator, and it can help individuals see beyond their current struggles to envision a life of greater possibility and purpose. And so this is why when we think about the Bridges framework, we're really helping to build hope through the spiritual resource. Um, Through the many years that I've spent in the social impact space, there's conversations and thoughts around how do we help folks experience stability by providing financial support and financial resources, financial literacy, education. All of that is important, but if the spiritual resource is low, oftentimes hope is low as well. And so the goal is, through this spiritual resource, we are not only building hope, but we're also building one's internal motivator, confidence, to begin to see a future beyond their today. And the other key here is that hope also fuels resilience. It helps people persist in achieving long-term goals despite setbacks and despite systemic barriers. And so really taking the time to invest in building a spiritual resource within our organizations, within our communities, and even at the policy levels has implications long-term when it comes to helping folks to experience sustainability and really bridge out of poverty. So let's talk a little bit about life in poverty. I want to begin kind of painting a picture as to what can be deterrents to hope and what can a faded mentality look like when it comes to life in poverty. And it also kind of builds the case as to why building hope is important. So when we think about life in poverty, this is the mental model for the economic environment of instability or the economic environment of poverty. And life in poverty, oftentimes it's how are we spending our time? How we spend our time determines our knowledge base. It determines what we know, but also it determines really just our ability to navigate the environment, the economic environment that we're in. So when we think about life in poverty, and usually I'll work with groups and we'll create mental models for instability or life in poverty. It often looks like this. This mental model was created by a group of getting ahead participants and investigators, and they kind of painted what does life look like in poverty. And usually it looks like this across many communities that I visit. And there's challenges with transportation. There's this idea of agency time. And that's going from one agency to another agency to another agency, telling your story over and over and over and over again. It could be challenges with childcare. It can be food insecurity, housing insecurity, living in a community that's considered a food desert or where there's food apartheid, health challenges, not being able to afford medication. So when we think about the mental model of poverty, I want us to also take away that there's this concept known as tyranny of the moment. When we think about that mental model, tyranny of the moment exists. And tyranny of the moment, which was coined by Paulo Freire, a Brazilian activist, He describes poverty as the tyranny of the moment, which is being in a state of crisis after crisis after crisis. Tyranny of the moment creates what is known as a survival mindset, where all energy is focused on survival. Because when you're experiencing one crisis after another, sometimes it can be a little bit challenging to focus on abstract thinking because all of your thinking and energy is focused on concrete problem solving. I have to figure out how will I get through this eviction, or I need to put food on the table tonight, or just really concrete problem solving. And so tyranny of the moment, which is this crisis after crisis survival mindset, can create a nowness where it's sometimes difficult to see beyond today. And so that's why we begin to really consider, how does a spiritual resource help to kind of break one out of that tyranny of the moment mindset. The mindset comes from the environment. It comes from the external factors of one crisis after another crisis, creating this circumstance where one can feel trapped, where one can feel powerless, or as if they have very little choice. And so that's why it's so critical to build the spiritual resource, because it really helps to reincorporate power and choice into a circumstance or into a situation. But really quickly, I just want to share a few quick quotes here as it relates to tyranny of the moment. The need to act can overwhelm any willingness people may have to learn. And when we think about the need to act, it's really this reactionary mode in terms of reacting to crisis, reacting to problems, reacting in order to survive. And so when we think about learning, new learning, abstract ideas, oftentimes the need to act can overwhelm learning, new learning, and planning and abstract ideas. And so that's why, again, when we think of the spiritual resource, it really helps to help one begin envision a future story, so that one can begin to break out of the tyranny of the moment. It's really an important resource when we think about bridging out of poverty. Here's another quick quote here. The healthier you are psychologically, or the less you may seem to need to change, the more you can change. This kind of speaks to this idea of stability. The more stability you have, the more change you're able to make in your life. When you're experiencing high levels of instability, it is difficult to make changes when you're navigating instability. But yet, when there's a bit of stability, when you're healthy psychologically, or you don't need to make as many changes because of this stability, it allows you the opportunity to envision a future story. So how do we take away these concepts when considering life in poverty, when we consider the mental model of the economic environment of poverty and instability, and how it relates to this idea of building the spiritual resource? And so I wanted to share that this is a mental model of what tyranny of the moment looks like as it relates to the economic environment of instability. It is explosion after explosion after explosion. It is one problem after another. And what's interesting is that this economic environment is so fragile that if something goes wrong in one area of life, it will impact so many other areas. And so if the car breaks down, the individual will have a difficult time making it to and from work. It can be now they're late multiple days. They're at risk of losing their employment. Then they lose their job. Then now they're having a difficult time with maintaining their utilities and paying for their housing. And then utilities get shut off. And then there's an eviction notice. Now they're in a shell. So one challenge, one crisis, because of how fragile this economic environment is, it can lead to one problem after another after another. But here's the other side to it. This economic environment cultivates a resilient mindset. It really cultivates strong problem solvers. So I do want to also add that if anyone can navigate this economic environment and you're solving concrete problems each and every day, one after another, many times in very creative ways, anyone who can navigate this environment is a problem solver. This is a voice that always should be amplified. This is the voice that should be at the table for building sustainable solutions for our communities, for addressing challenges in our communities. This voice should always be at the table. But however, building the spiritual resource is what helps to also build this sense of internal drive to envision a future story, this internal drive to also build resilience. And so I just always like to mention that there's strengths that comes from this economic environment, but there are also challenges. And so when we think about tyranny of the moment, again, it's this crisis, it's explosions on the mental model, it's a nowness, it's this feeling of, it doesn't feel good. It's a feeling of worrying about today. And it's a feeling that you can't stop bad things from happening. And so when one bad thing happens that leads to another bad thing, to another crisis, to another obstacle, it kind of begins to build in this feeling that you cannot stop bad things from happening. It's just your fate. This is just what it is. It's just going to be something else. If it's not this today, it'll be that tomorrow. And so it creates this worrying, this anxiousness. And oftentimes the worrying is for trying to get through today. Now, when we think about the concept of future stories, we're really trying to envision a better future. And how difficult can that be when one is in the tyranny of the moment, when one is trying to survive today, when your mindset is focusing on how will I make it through the day? How can I feel like I have the power to stop bad things from happening? How can I make it through this crisis when I still have 5 other crises on the burner? And so again, when we think about this concept of building a future story and how the spiritual resource can be a pathway to future stories, it's really important to understand how tyranny of the moment plays a role. Tyranny of the moment can be a hindrance to envisioning a future story, to seeing a future and a life better than what you are experiencing now. Tyranny of the moment is a mindset, and it's a mindset that can be broken if we help folks build the spiritual resource, if we help our organizations build the spiritual resource, and even our communities. Just so you all know, tyranny of the moment not only happens with individuals, but organizations and communities can be in the tyranny of the moment. Organizations experience instability. Grants are getting cut. There's a lack of professional development. There's not enough funding to make it through the next program cycle. Organizations can experience poverty, instability, and tyranny of the moment. Communities can experience instability. There's not enough in the budget for infrastructure. The city or the community is budgeting, not able to see beyond the next year. So it's 1 year at a time. So this doesn't only happen at the individual level, but it can really happen at all 4 lenses. When we think about policy change, when we think about shifting our communities, when we think about organizational transformation, and when we think about the stability of one's individual life. And so building the spiritual resource, it's really important to embed it at all levels. I'll share some tools of how to practically embed it how to practically take a look at the spiritual resource and building it at the individual level. But I do want to stress the importance of why the spiritual resource should be embedded and included at all levels when we think about how do we build sustainable communities. And so tyranny of the moment, again, a hindrance to building a future story, because it's a mindset that can get folks, it can cause one to be stuck in the now. But here's another key point I want to share when it comes to tyranny of the moment. And I think this is really important. Poverty and all its related concerns require so much mental energy that it can cause one to have less remaining brain power to devote to other areas of life. And so when helping someone to begin thinking about a future story, how do we understand that poverty, instability can drain one of their mental energy And the abstract idea of what is my future, what do I see in 5 years, can be challenging when there's a nowness in my thoughts, in my thinking, in my problem solving, in my day to day. So if the day to day is drained of mental energy, of agency time, survival mode, food insecurity, housing insecurity, it can make it a little bit difficult to devote brain power and mental energy to other areas of life, such as what do I see beyond today? And so again, this is why this building the spiritual resource is really key to future stories. It's a pathway to building future stories. It is a pathway to building hope. And so I'll talk a little bit about what the hidden rules look like when it comes to destiny and hope. And so the other quick piece here, when bandwidth is loaded, this is what happens. I do want to point this out. When your bandwidth is loaded, you're just more likely to not notice things. You're more likely to not resist things you ought to resist. So there's even a form of oppression that can take place, not resisting oppression. You're more likely to forget things. You're more likely to have less patience and less attention to devote to even children when they come home from school or family relationships, because bandwidth is loaded. The bandwidth is loaded. And so this is key when we think about mental energy, when we think about tyranny of the moment, brain power, and how this creates this how all of these concepts, these elements create an environment that's concrete and a nowness and a worrying about today. If anyone here has ever experienced the poverty simulation, if not, I encourage you to look into it. You'll kind of understand how these elements play out, especially through poverty simulations, where once you experience a poverty simulation, you go through it, it kind of can feel a little draining, but it's just a 3-hour simulation that feels draining, a 3-hour activity. However, this activity is 24 hours, 7 days a week of someone's reality. This constant mental energy that's being drained, brain power that's being drained, and bandwidth being loaded with trying to survive. And so, again, I keep bringing this back as to why building the spiritual resource is really key when we think about supporting individuals and families in bridging out of poverty and even building solutions within our communities that are sustainable. So really quickly, the hidden rule around destiny. And I kind of painted a picture that led us to this space here. But when it comes to hidden rules are unspoken cues. And it comes from our situated learning environment. So it comes from our environment. It's unspoken cues from that environment. And one of the hidden rules, there's hidden rules for anyone who's new to this work. There are hidden rules around relationships, hidden rules around money, hidden rules around education. But I want to spend some time talking about the hidden rules around destiny. How do I envision my future? What is my destiny? How do I envision my future? When it comes to the economic environment of instability, the hidden rules around destiny is that one believes in fate. Now, again, one thought that I do want to share with hidden rules is that hidden rules are dynamic. They're not static. So we all have our own societal experiences. We all have our own social cognitive framework. And so we can all go between different sets of hidden rules. So it doesn't mean that everyone experiencing instability and poverty, that this is their hidden rule, or anyone who is in the economic environment of middle class, these are their hidden rules. Hidden rules are dynamic, and we flow between different sets of hidden rules. So that's another piece that I do want to share. But when we think about the environment itself, the hidden rule around poverty is that one may believe in fate, and it can feel as if that you can not do much to mitigate your chances. There's not much that you can do to mitigate your chances. And what happens is that this hidden rule creates what is known as a fated mentality. And it's this belief that I cannot do much to stop bad things from happening. One is constantly worrying about today. And this is just your fate. This is your fate. There's nothing you can do to change it. And especially anyone who has experienced generational poverty, where two or more generations have lived or experienced poverty within a family, it can really, this hidden rule around destiny can really play out, where one would really begin to believe that this experience, the circumstances that they're in, is their fate. Their grandparents experienced it, their parents experienced it, today they're experiencing it. So how can they do much to mitigate chances when it has been seen in their family for many generations what they're experiencing? And so the hidden rule around destiny, when as it relates to poverty, can oftentimes develop what is known, as I mentioned earlier, as a fated mentality. And this kind of ties again back as to why the spiritual resource matters. I'll just share really quickly when it comes to middle class and wealth, the economic environment of middle class, oftentimes there's a belief in choice. And there's actually a belief in one's future story. And this ties back to the quote that I mentioned earlier: the healthier you are psychologically, or the less you may seem to need to change, it allows you the opportunity to make more changes in your life. So when there's a bit of stability in place, there's this opportunity, there's this amazing privilege to plan out one's future story because of stability. But again, when we think about poverty, when we think about instability, it's a tyranny of the moment. It's a survival mode. It's crisis after crisis. And crisis after crisis survival mode can create a mindset where this is just one's fate. And so the spiritual resource, again, is building this hope. It's building this ability for one to really begin to envision their future, that there's possibilities, and the possibilities are at reach. They are tangible. We can reach them. And so I wanted to share some practical strategies for nurturing hope. And what I'll do is I'll share a few strategies that we can think about at the individual level, a few strategies at the organizational level and the community policy level. But I really want to spend time um, really discussing these strategies that nurture hope at the individual level. So just really quickly here, I love this quote. This is a quote by Helen Keller. Anyone who knows Helen Keller, she is a remarkable author, a remarkable educator. She was a world changer. Helen Keller was born deaf and blind. And this is a powerful quote that Helen Keller shares here, that the only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision. I almost feel like I have to repeat that because it's so powerful. The only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision. And when we think about vision, vision is key to transformation. Vision really helps to shape and build future stories. And so I really want to share that as a practical tool. I'll talk a little bit more about it, but I wanted to kind of share this powerful quote by Helen Keller. So practical tools for building hope and vision. Again, this is building the spiritual resource, is essentially building hope, is building future stories, is building vision. And so at the individual level, it's visioning exercises, it's planning backwards, it's storytelling as some key strategies. At the organizational level, it's embedding the spiritual resource in programming. And it's also embedding the spiritual resource in the future story of your organization. And oftentimes you'll find the future story of your organization within your strategic plan. This is where you're looking at the next 3 to 5 years within your organization, and how are we meeting our vision? How do we continue to become mission driven? You'll find it in your mission, you'll find it in your strategic plan. And then at the policy level, how do we promote hope and resilience in public policy? And again, being able to embed the spiritual resource at all levels, I shared earlier, is really important, because tyranny of the moment does not only happen with individuals. Instability does not only happen with individuals, but organizations can experience poverty, instability, tyranny of the moment. Communities experience it, as well as as I mentioned before, organizations and communities. So embedding it at all levels is really key when we think about overall quality of life, not only for an individual, but for overall wellness in our communities. So let's talk a little bit about visioning and planning backwards. These are the two tools that it can work at all levels. I think is really powerful when we think about it at the individual level. It's especially for folks who are experiencing poverty, experiencing instability. As Helen Keller mentioned, what's far more worse than being blind is to actually have sight but not have vision. And so when it comes to visioning, visioning is a powerful tool. Visioning promotes abstract thinking. And when used with a future story, it can promote power and hope. So these two tools here, these two strategies are essential for incorporating future orientation, choice, and power into someone's life, into a situation, into a circumstance. And so it's not only painting a picture of how would it look in our future, but we also tap into our other senses. So when it comes to visioning, we're really also exploring how does it feel. Um, whenever I think of visioning exercises, many that I've done, there's always encouragement for me to think about future Nicole. Who is future Nicole? What is she? What are her thoughts? What are her values? How does she think? Where does she live? What type of food does she eat when it comes to her health? And how does her relationships look like? Like, how are they? Are they healthy? Um, are they empowering? Is there a balance in relationships? So it's really not just painting a picture of what it looks like, but it's also what does it feel like? And it's imagery, it's tapping into our senses, all of our senses. It's really even thinking about everything from what do you envision yourself doing in the future? What work do you see yourself doing, or what sector do you see yourself in? What home would you want to live in? What community would you want to live in? What community do you want to impact? What do you see for the future of your children? So I love visioning exercises because again, it's powerful. There's so many different tools out there. There's Stephen Covey, who's the amazing author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, talks about a visioning tool called Have Do Be. And it's really kind of helps folks to think about if there were no restrictions, no constraints in your life, if money was not an issue, you didn't have any constraints, what would you want to have in life? What would you want to do? And how would you want to be? How would you want to show up in the world? And there's even laws around um, physics laws, quantum physics laws around visioning and how what we think about, what we think and what we perceive in our mind really helps to build a pathway into our reality and what can actually happen in our future. And so visioning, it helps to build resonance and it promotes hope and confidence. So definitely it goes beyond the vision board, but it also taps into how do you feel? Who is the future self? Who is your future self? Now here's another tool to add to visioning exercises. Once we kind of walk through visioning, another powerful tool is planning backwards. And planning backwards is about breaking down any plans into parts. So it's thinking about the end in mind. It's thinking about the end goal, that future story, but how do we plan backwards to where we are today? And so it can even be a year out. It can be a goal that's 6 months out. So in 6 months, this is what I want to accomplish. What will I be doing? What are the procedural steps that I'll take the week before, the day before, month 5? What am I doing month 5 before hitting my 6-month goal? What am I doing month 2, 3? And so planning backwards helps us to also anticipate challenges and develop solutions for any challenges or obstacles that may come along the way. Because as we plan backwards, it allows us to not get discouraged in the process of moving towards our future vision, our future stories. And so I just wanted to kind of share those two tools here. This is a mental model for planning backwards. I utilize this. I think it's a very powerful tool. Again, this tool can be 5 years out. It can be 3 years out. It can be 1 month out. But it is really powerful when really thinking through procedural steps that leads to the end goal, that leads to the future story. So once we engage in visioning, and visioning is really it's a fun exercise because it lets us dream. It helps us to kind of for a moment just step away from our current circumstance and begin to build out and paint and draw out our future stories. So it's really fun. It's really exciting. It builds confidence. It also builds resilience. And so visioning is a powerful tool, but accompanying that tool with planning backwards is even more powerful. So again, I just wanted to share those two tools here. And I want to leave you with this last quote, building hope and building vision. This comes from Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl is a Holocaust survivor, and one of the amazing body of work is A Man's Search for Meaning. And here's a quick quote here. It says, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And hope is not just about wishful thinking, but it really is a powerful force. And this is why I said for many, it could be tied to their faith, because it's a powerful force that transforms lives. It's a powerful force that empowers individuals to rewrite their future stories. And so thank you. Again, my name is Nicole Baptiste, and I am a national consultant with AHA Process.
Thank you, Nicole.
You're welcome.